Beneath a barren mountain in western China sit pipes made of iron, embedded in solid rock, that predate the arrival of human beings in that region by over 100,000 years. That is not a theory. That is a measurement taken by Chinese government scientists using a dating method built specifically to catch fraud and error. And when researchers finally sliced one of these pipes open to look inside, what they found wasn't machinery, wasn't a seam, wasn't a weld. It was a pattern of concentric rings running through solid iron-red mineral that looked exactly like the growth rings of a tree. That single cross-section, more than anything else, is the key to this entire mystery, and almost nobody who's shared this story online has ever actually shown it to you. This is the story of the Baigong Pipes, one of the strangest unresolved puzzles in modern geology. And it is also a story about what happens when a genuine scientific mystery collides with a government press release, a tourism board, and an internet that was primed to believe in aliens. The site sits near the town of Dalinga in China's Qinghai province, on the eastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau. This is not gentle countryside. It is high-altitude desert, thin air, salt lakes, and rock formations scoured by wind for millions of years. Mount Baigong rises out of that landscape almost like a mistake, a jagged outcrop overlooking a saline lake called Tosan Lake. In 1996, a group of Chinese researchers exploring the area found something that did not belong. Inside a cave on the mountain, rising out of the cave floor and jutting from its walls, were dozens of pipe-like structures. Some were microscopic, barely visible without close inspection. Others were as wide as 40 centimeters in diameter, thick enough to put your fist through. They were rust-colored, brittle in places, and unmistakably tube-shaped, running at odd angles through rock that had no business containing anything tube-shaped at all. More pipes were found outside the cave, protruding from the hillside itself, and scattered along the shoreline of Tosan Lake, some of them rising straight out of the water. The first instinct of anyone standing in that cave is the same instinct you're probably having right now. Pipes mean plumbing, and plumbing means somebody built this. Rock does not grow rust-colored tubes on its own, not in the way most people picture geology working. So the first question the researchers had to answer was simple. Are these natural, or are they manufactured? They took samples back to a laboratory for analysis, and the material composition came back strange enough to keep the mystery alive. The pipes were made of roughly 30% ferric oxide, which is oxidized iron, mixed with large amounts of silicon dioxide and calcium oxide, both extremely common minerals found in rock all over the planet. That part sounds mundane. But when the full analysis was run, about 8% of the material could not be identified using the equipment available at the time. Not trace contamination, not measurement error accounted for by margin of error, an unidentified 8% sitting in a peer-reviewed mineral analysis. In a story that already had rust-colored pipes growing out of solid rock, an 8% unknown was rocket fuel. Then came the radioactivity. In 2007, geologist Zheng Jiandong, who studied the site directly, documented that the pipes displayed unusual levels of radioactivity relative to the surrounding rock. This is a real, published, on-the-record finding from a scientist who physically examined the material, not an internet rumor. It does not mean anything paranormal by itself. Plenty of natural mineral deposits carry elevated radioactivity, particularly ones rich in certain iron and uranium-bearing compounds. But combined with the unidentified 8% and the strange tube geometry, it meant that when people started asking, what are we actually looking at here? Scientists did not have an immediate, tidy answer. That gap, that honest scientific uncertainty, is where every wild theory about the Baigong pipes was born. The detail that turned this from a regional curiosity into an international sensation was the age. Researchers used a technique called thermoluminescence, dating a material associated with the pipes. Thermoluminescence works by measuring the amount of trapped energy inside certain crystalline minerals, energy that builds up over time from natural background radiation and gets released as light when the mineral is heated. It is a legitimate, widely used method in geology and archaeology, and it is especially useful for dating sediment layers, because it tells you roughly how long ago that material was last exposed to sunlight or intense heat. The result that came back from the Baigong material was staggering. Approximately 150,000 years old. To put that number in context, modern humans are generally understood to have reached this specific region of the Tibetan Plateau within roughly the last 30,000 years. Some estimates put meaningful settlement even later than that. A number like 150,000 years does not fit into that timeline. It predates not just Chinese civilization, not just agriculture, not just cities. It predates the presence of anatomically modern humans in that exact location by a margin of roughly 5 times. If the pipes really were 150,000 years old and really were manufactured, then somebody, or something, was doing metalwork on the Tibetan Plateau tens of thousands of years before the earliest known humans ever set foot there. That is the sentence that broke containment. China's state-run Xinhua news agency ran coverage of the discovery that leaned into the mystery angle, describing the pipes and openly floating the idea that the structures could be linked to extraterrestrial activity, sometimes referencing them alongside a nearby pyramid-shaped rock formation that local legend had already nicknamed an alien relay tower. Once a state news agency puts the word extraterrestrial anywhere near a real archaeological find, the story writes itself for the rest of the internet. Western paranormal outlets picked it up almost immediately, filing the Baigong pipes into the same mental folder as ancient astronaut theories about the pyramids of Giza or the Nazca lines. The local government, seeing an opportunity, leaned into it too. Signs went up along the highway pointing tourists toward the ET relics. A regional tourism industry quietly formed around a rock formation that, at that point, no one had definitively explained. Here is where the story usually stops, in most of the versions you've probably already seen online. Mysterious ancient pipes, older than humanity, official government agency hinting at aliens, cue dramatic music, end of video. But that is not where the actual scientific story stopped. That's where it started, because Chinese researchers themselves were not satisfied with maybe aliens as an answer, and they went back to do the actual work of ruling explanations in or out. Two natural theories came first, and both are grounded in the region's brutal geologic history. Qinghai sits atop the Tibetan Plateau, where the Indian and Eurasian plates have been colliding for tens of millions of years, still pushing the Himalayas upward today. That kind of tectonic violence fractures rock and forces magma up through fissures, and cooled magma inside a narrow crack, once the softer surrounding sandstone erodes away, can be left standing looking remarkably like a manufactured pipe. Alongside that, the area has cycled through repeated flooding and drying for hundreds of millennia, and the local soil is heavy with iron. Iron-rich floodwater seeping into cracks in the sandstone can harden over vast stretches of time into solid deposits shaped exactly like the fissures that contained them. Natural molds, filled in and left behind, once the surrounding stone wore away. Neither theory requires a builder, human or otherwise. But neither one, on its own, explained everything researchers were finding inside the pipes. That's where the tree rings from the opening come back in. When researchers cut cross-sections into several of the pipes for closer analysis, they didn't just see the ring pattern, they also confirmed, using atomic emission spectroscopy, the presence of organic plant origin compounds directly inside the pipe material itself. Rings plus actual plant chemistry, found together, pointed toward something more specific than a magma cast or flood deposit. Put those two observations together and you get the leading explanation. The Baigong pipes are fossilized tree roots. Here's how that process works. A tree grows in the region. Over time, through flooding, volcanic ashfall, or sediment burial, the tree gets covered and cut off from oxygen, which halts normal decay. Groundwater moving through the buried wood is rich in dissolved minerals, iron, silica, calcite. As centuries and millennia pass, those minerals slowly replace the organic wood fiber cell by cell, in a process called permineralization. Essentially the same process that produces petrified wood anywhere else in the world, except here the mineral doing the replacing happened to be heavily iron-based rather than the silica you typically see in classic petrified forests. The end result, after enough geologic time, is a solid mineral cast in the exact shape of the original root system, hollow in places where the innermost wood decayed before mineralization finished. Tube-shaped because roots are tube-shaped, and rusty red-brown because the mineral doing the replacing was iron oxide. This isn't a theory invented specifically to explain away the Baigong pipes either. It's a well-documented geological phenomenon found in multiple places around the world. In parts of Louisiana and Pennsylvania in the United States, geologists have identified nearly identical formations, iron-rich tube structures running through sedimentary rock that look, at a casual glance, exactly like buried industrial piping. Researchers who studied the Louisiana formations directly concluded that the cylinders were taproot casts of fossil trees, structures where sediment replaced the wood, and where later erosion exposed the resulting iron-cemented tubes as standalone objects protruding from the surrounding rock. If a tourist stumbled onto the Louisiana site with no geological background, they would likely describe it the exact same way people described Mount Baigong, as mysterious ancient pipes with no obvious origin. That parallel matters enormously because it means the Baigong pipes are not a lone anomaly requiring a special explanation. They belong to a known category of natural formation that geologists have independently documented on a different continent, using different rock, arriving at the same conclusion. That's what a genuine scientific explanation looks like. Not a single convenient answer invented to make a mystery go away, but multiple independent lines of evidence converging on the same conclusion from different directions. The mineral composition points toward permineralized organic material. The visible tree ring pattern points toward wood. The presence of plant compounds under spectroscopy points toward biological origin. And a comparable formation exists elsewhere on Earth that nobody ever seriously proposed was extraterrestrial because nobody had built a tourism campaign around it. So does that settle everything? Not entirely, and this is the part that deserves honesty rather than a tidy bow. The 150,000-year thermoluminescence date remains genuinely contested among geologists. Thermoluminescence dating is highly sensitive to contamination, to the specific mineral grains being tested, and to disturbances the sample may have gone through since burial. Many researchers who've reviewed the dating argue the number likely reflects the age of the surrounding sediment layer the pipes were embedded in, rather than the precise formation age of the pipe structures themselves, which could be considerably younger, or in some interpretations, considerably different depending on which layer was actually sampled. The elevated radioactivity Zhengjiandong documented in 2007 also hasn't been fully explained in a way that closes the book. It's consistent with certain iron-rich mineral deposits, but a complete account of why these specific formations register the way they do hasn't been nailed down with total certainty. And that unidentified 8% from the original material analysis, run with the equipment available at the time, has never been definitively resolved as far as publicly available research shows. That's not a loophole for an alien theory to sneak back in. It's simply where legitimate scientific uncertainty actually sits, once you strip away the tourism board framing and the outlet headlines. Real geology, especially fieldwork in a remote, hard-to-access site like this one, on the Tibetan Plateau, doesn't always resolve into a clean, complete answer on the first pass. What we have is a strong, well-supported leading explanation. Fossilized root casts formed through mineral permineralization, backed by physical evidence found inside the pipes themselves and mirrored by comparable formations found independently elsewhere in the world. And what we don't have is absolute closure on every measurement taken at the site, particularly the dating. There's also a cultural layer to this story that rarely makes it into the viral versions. Local Tibetan communities near Mount Baigong have their own long-standing folklore about the site, describing the pipes in some oral traditions as remnants left behind by celestial beings, iron placed by figures from the sky. That kind of legend predates the 1996 scientific expedition by generations, which tells you something important. This landscape has been strange enough to inspire stories for a long time, independent of any modern conspiracy theory or tourism campaign. When Xinhua's coverage floated the extraterrestrial angle in the early 2000s, it wasn't inventing a new idea out of nowhere. It was tapping into folklore that already existed on the ground and packaging it for a global audience that was primed to consume it. And that packaging worked extremely well. The government restricted certain access to portions of the site in later years, which, rather than calming speculation, only deepened it online. Restricted access reads, to a certain kind of audience, as confirmation that something is being hidden, even when the more mundane explanation, protecting a fragile and scientifically significant geological formation from tourist damage and unauthorized sample collection, fits the facts just as well, arguably better. So where does that leave us? A mountain on the edge of the Tibetan Plateau contains iron-rich tube-shaped formations that are almost certainly the fossilized remains of an ancient forest, mineral casts of root systems, replaced atom by atom over an immense span of geologic time. The same basic process that has created similar structures in the United States and elsewhere. The dating of exactly how old those formations are remains genuinely unresolved among the scientists who've studied them, not because the answer is being suppressed, but because dating fossilized mineral structures in remote fieldwork conditions is difficult, and thermoluminescence measurements taken from surrounding sediment don't always map cleanly onto the exact age of the object being dated. The radioactivity and the small unidentified percentage of the material composition remain loose threads that haven't been fully tied off in available published research. None of that requires aliens. All of it requires patience, more fieldwork, and probably more advanced instrumentation than what was available to the teams working the site in 1996 and the years immediately after. What makes the Baigong pipes worth telling this story about isn't that science failed to explain them. It's the opposite. It's a case study in how science actually works when it's allowed to run its full course. An anomaly gets discovered, initial data comes back looking genuinely strange, speculation fills the gap because that's what human curiosity does, and then researchers go back again and again, testing composition, testing structure, testing biological content, cross-referencing against known formations elsewhere on the planet, until a well-supported natural explanation emerges, even while a few threads remain open for future study. That process is slower and less cinematics than ancient aliens built pipes on a mountain no human should have reached for another 100,000 years. But it's also the process that actually gets you closer to the truth. And in this case, the truth An ancient forest slowly turned to iron and buried inside a mountain on the roof of the world is stranger and more genuinely remarkable than the alien story ever needed to be.